Meet Maria, a courageous single mother whose life unravels when her innocent daughter Sophia uncovers a dangerous secret hidden behind the pantry door of the diner where Maria works. As threats close in, Maria must risk everything to protect her child and expose a criminal operation that could destroy them both. Will her bravery be enough to secure their freedom and a second chance? This is a gripping story of fear, resilience, and hope you won't forget. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a powerful story like this one. Maria Torres had never liked mornings, but she especially hated the ones that began with bad news before sunrise. Her phone screen glowed with a message that made her stomach knot tighter than the frayed apron she kept folded in her work bag. "Sorry, Maria, my son's sick. I can't watch Sophia today." She read it twice, praying the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something easier. But reality didn't care about prayers, and the landlord didn't care about excuses. Rent was due in 4 days. Her ex-husband hadn't sent a single payment in 3 months, and if she didn't show up to the diner by 6, Franklin would dock her hours again. She looked over at her daughter, still curled up under the thin blanket on the couch. Sophia's hair was a messy halo of dark curls, her thumb tucked in her mouth the way she used to do as a baby. 5 years old, too small to be alone, but old enough to sense when something was wrong. Maria rubbed her eyes and whispered to herself, "We'll figure it out." Then she pulled on her jeans, slipped her feet into her black sneakers, and gently shook Sophia awake. "Mommy?" Sophia murmured, blinking up at her. "Baby, I need you to be brave today." She said it with a calmness she didn't feel. The morning air was already humid when they stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk. A delivery truck rumbled past, splashing a puddle onto Maria's work pants. She didn't bother to curse it. She was too busy rehearsing what she'd tell Franklin when he saw Sophia trailing behind her. Inside the diner, the familiar clatter of dishes and the hiss of the coffee machine greeted them. Maria felt the tension in her shoulders loosen just an inch. She belonged here, in the predictable chaos of breakfast rush. The place smelled like burnt toast and cheap soap. But it was steady work. Steady was good. Franklin was at the register, hunched over a stack of invoices. He was 32, but already had the tired eyes of a man twice that age. When he spotted Maria and the little girl behind her, his expression shifted from surprise to irritation. "Maria." His voice was flat, but she braced herself like he'd shouted. "What is this?" She knelt and smoothed Sophia's hair. "Go sit on that stool, sweetheart. Don't move, okay?" She waited until Sophia obeyed, her small hands folded in her lap before she turned to Franklin. "My sitter canceled at the last minute," she began. "I didn't know what else to." "You know this is against policy." He glanced at the customers already sipping coffee at the booths. "If the health inspector walks in, I'll keep her out of sight, just for today. I can't afford to lose this shift." He rubbed his forehead and muttered something she couldn't hear. For a moment, she thought he'd tell her to turn around and leave. But then he sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Fine. One day. She stays in the break room. If she comes out here, you're both going home." Relief rushed through her so fast she nearly stumbled. "Thank you. I promise you won't even know she's here." He didn't respond. He just went back to his invoices as if the conversation had never happened. Maria led Sophia behind the swinging door that separated the kitchen from the dining area. The break room was little more than a closet with a cracked vinyl couch, a rusted locker, and a tiny TV with no remote. But it was better than nothing. "Stay here, Mia," Maria whispered. She pulled Sophia close and kissed the crown of her head. "I'll come check on you every chance I get." Sophia nodded solemnly. She was too young to understand everything, but she understood enough. They needed this job, and that meant she needed to be quiet. Maria hurried back out and tied her apron, ignoring the pitying look from Alma, the older waitress setting up coffee cups. Alma had worked at the diner longer than anyone. She knew what it was to be a single mother with no good options. "You're doing your best," Alma murmured as Maria passed. Maria swallowed the lump in her throat. She couldn't afford tears. Tears were for women who had backup plans. By 6:15, the first wave of customers had arrived. Construction workers in neon vests, a nurse coming off night shift, 2 college kids with bleary eyes and empty wallets. Maria moved between them with the practiced rhythm she'd learned over 3 years of working there. Coffee pot in one hand, order pad in the other, smile just bright enough to keep the tips coming. But every few minutes her eyes drifted to the kitchen door. Was Sophia okay? Was she scared? At 7, Franklin shouted her name. Maria! She froze, heart jumping into her throat. He was standing near the break room door, his jaw tight. She came out here, he said, voice low but sharp. Sophia was peeking around his leg, her small face pale. I just needed the bathroom, she stammered in her tiny voice. Maria dropped the coffee pot on the counter, ignoring the hot splash against her wrist. She scooped Sophia into her arms and turned to Franklin. Please, she didn't mean. He held up a hand. I said one day. You still have one day. Keep her back there. Maria carried Sophia into the break room and set her down on the couch. She crouched so their eyes were level. Honey, I know it's boring in here, but you have to stay. Can you do that for me? Sophia nodded, tears welling up. Maria's heart cracked a little more. I'll bring you something to color. She found a pen and the back of an old invoice and gave them to Sophia. When she stepped back into the kitchen, her hands were trembling so badly she nearly dropped the plates waiting to be served. Hours passed in a blur. Orders, refills, dropped forks, spilled syrup. The lunch rush bled into the afternoon, and Maria's feet ached so badly she could barely feel them. Twice she managed to slip into the break room, just long enough to hug Sophia and whisper reassurance. Around 3, Alma found her wiping down the counter. He's in a mood, Alma warned in a low voice. Maria didn't have to ask who she meant. Franklin had been stalking around the diner, snapping at the cooks, grumbling about missing shipments and invoices that didn't add up. At 3:30, a tall man in a gray jacket took a seat at the corner booth. He ordered coffee and watched the kitchen door more than he looked at his menu. Maria poured his coffee and forced her smile. Afternoon, sir? You waiting for someone? His eyes flicked to her name tag. Maybe. She didn't have the energy to figure out his meaning. She just went back to her section, but she felt his gaze lingering like a weight between her shoulder blades. By 4, her head was pounding. She slipped into the break room one last time before her shift ended. Sophia was curled up asleep, clutching the pen and paper in her small fist. On the paper, she'd drawn a door with big X marks across it and little stick figures standing beside crates. Maria frowned, studying it. What's this? She murmured. Sophia stirred. The men with boxes. They said I can't go in there. Maria felt a chill. What men? The ones in the kitchen. They were moving the boxes with the X's. Her throat went dry. The pantry. She'd seen Franklin and the cooks going in and out all day more than usual. Did you tell anyone else? She whispered. Sophia shook her head, already drifting back to sleep. Maria tucked the paper into her apron pocket, heart thudding. She didn't know why it mattered, but something about those X's made her uneasy. She stepped back into the kitchen, scanning the room. The tall man in the gray jacket was still in his booth, sipping coffee and watching everything. Maria took a deep breath and turned back to her tables. For now, she needed to focus on getting through the day. But in the back of her mind, the image of that door, marked with her daughter's innocent X's, would not go away. Maria didn't sleep that night. Even after she tucked Sophia into their narrow bed and smoothed the girl's curls off her forehead, she lay awake on the sagging couch, staring at the ceiling where water stains made odd, shapeless patterns. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the drawing Sophia had made, those crude little X's over a door, the crates behind it, and the faceless men with stick arms. She kept telling herself it was nothing, just the imagination of a 5-year-old stuck in a dull break room. Still, the unease coiled tighter around her chest with every hour she spent in the darkness. At dawn, she got up and dressed in the same uniform she'd worn yesterday, though she didn't remember taking it off. Sophia woke slowly, blinking like she couldn't quite decide if she was happy to see another morning or sad it meant going back to the diner. Maria forced herself to sound cheerful. Come on, Mia, she whispered, brushing crumbs from Sophia's cheeks. We'll get a muffin on the way. They walked the 12 blocks in silence, the early commuters parting around them like they were invisible. Maria's thoughts moved in circles. She tried to imagine Franklin doing anything illegal and couldn't. He was too practical, too anxious about the bills and the health inspector and the constant threat of Yelp reviews tanking the diner's reputation. But the crates were real. Sophia's drawing was real. And the look in the tall man's eyes, like he knew something she didn't, was real too. When they reached the diner, Franklin was already there, leaning against the door with a paper cup of coffee balanced on the metal railing. He didn't look angry exactly, but his expression was tight, like he'd been up all night grinding his teeth. "You're early," he said, as if that were suspicious in itself. Maria lifted her chin. "I wanted to get a head start. I can mop before the morning rush." He looked at Sophia, then back at Maria. "She's staying in the break room again?" "Yes," Maria said quickly. She didn't want to give him a chance to say no. "She'll be quiet." He studied her for a moment. Then he sighed, unlocked the door, and waved them in. The kitchen smelled of onions and stale grease. Maria set Sophia up in the break room with a coloring book Alma had found in her car. She kissed the girl's cheek and pressed her forehead to Sophia's for a second longer than usual, like she was trying to transfer all her courage in that single touch. "If you need me, call," she whispered. Sophia nodded solemnly, already pulling a stubby crayon from the box. Maria tied on her apron and went to work. She tried to lose herself in routine, pouring coffee, wiping counters, scribbling orders on her pad with hands that still wouldn't stop trembling. At one point, she caught Alma watching her with that soft, pitying expression again, and she had to look away before the heat behind her eyes turned to tears. Halfway through the morning, Maria heard the break room door creak open. She turned just in time to see Sophia's small face peeking out, her eyes round as pennies. "Mommy," she whispered, beckoning frantically. Maria nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. She set it down on the counter and rushed over, heart thumping. "What's wrong?" she hissed, crouching to Sophia's level. "There's a man in there," Sophia said, voice so small it was almost a breath. "He came in from the kitchen. He told me not to look." Maria's scalp prickled. "What man?" "The one with the beard. He opened the big door and put boxes inside." Maria's mind flashed to the crates again. To the drawing. She swallowed hard. "Did he say anything else?" Sophia shook her head, curls bouncing. "He shut the door and said, 'Go sit down, kid.'" Maria forced a smile that felt like it would crack her face in half. "It's okay, Mija. Just stay here with Alma for a second." She turned and found Alma hovering behind her. "I'll watch her," Alma said quietly. Maria nodded, unable to speak, and slipped into the kitchen. The pantry door was closed. It looked perfectly ordinary, scuffed white paint, a brass knob, the sign that read "Staff Only" in peeling black letters. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she reached for it. Before she could touch the knob, Franklin's voice cut through the clatter of pots and the hiss of the grill. "Maria?" She jerked her hand back like the door had burned her. He was standing behind her with his arms folded. His gaze flicked from her face to the door and back again. "Don't," he said. Her mouth went dry. I just wanted to get more napkins." He didn't blink. "There are napkins by the register. You don't need to be in here." She felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "I know what you're doing," he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it over the kitchen noise. "Stay out of it." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her pulse hammering so hard she could taste it. The rest of the day passed like a bad dream. Every time Maria tried to focus on her tables, her eyes kept drifting back to that door. Every time she thought about asking Franklin what was in those boxes, she remembered the way his voice had sounded, like a warning. By late afternoon, Sophia had given up on her coloring book and was sitting on a milk crate in the kitchen, watching the cooks with solemn fascination. One of them, a heavy-set man with a salt and pepper beard, caught Maria's eye and scowled. "Your kid needs to stay out of here," he barked over the sizzling grill. Maria swallowed. "She's not in the way." "She doesn't belong in a kitchen," he snapped. "This isn't a daycare." Maria opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, Sophia pointed a small finger at the pantry door. "That's the door," she said brightly, like she was proud to recognize it. The cook's eyes widened, and for a split second, something flickered across his face, something that looked like fear. "Come here," he barked, grabbing Sophia by the upper arm. "Don't touch her." Maria lunged forward, yanking Sophia out of his grasp so fast the girl let out a startled cry. The entire kitchen froze. Franklin appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "What the hell is going on?" Maria hugged Sophia tight, her own breath coming in ragged bursts. He grabbed her. The cook threw up his hands. "She was pointing at the storage. She can't be in here." Franklin took one long look at the scene, Maria clutching her daughter, the cook red-faced with fury, the line cooks watching with wide eyes, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Both of you, my office, now." Maria's stomach dropped. He herded them into the cramped little office behind the prep station. The blinds were closed, but Maria could feel the curious eyes of the kitchen staff just beyond the thin walls. Franklin shut the door and turned to face her. "You promised me she'd stay out of the way," he said, voice low and dangerous. "She was just sitting." "I don't care." He slammed a hand on the desk, making Sophia flinch against Maria's chest. "This is a place of business. You understand that? I can't have a child running around pointing at things she shouldn't see." Maria's throat was so tight she could barely breathe. "Please, we need this job." Franklin looked at Sophia, then back at Maria. For a long moment, something almost like pity softened his eyes. "One more chance," he said finally. "One. If she leaves that break room again, you're both gone." Maria nodded, unable to find her voice. When he opened the door, she carried Sophia past the watching cooks and into the break room. She set the girl down on the couch and knelt, pressing her hands to Sophia's cheeks. "You have to stay here," she whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I mean it, Sophia. No more walking around." Sophia nodded, her big brown eyes shimmering with tears. She was too brave to let fall. Maria kissed her forehead and stood, feeling as if her legs would give out. She closed the door behind her and rested her forehead against the cool metal for a moment before she turned back to the dining room. When she stepped out, the tall man in the gray jacket was sitting in the same booth as yesterday. He looked up from his coffee and met her gaze, and this time she thought she saw understanding there, like he knew exactly what she was dealing with. She didn't have time to wonder what that meant. A table of tourists was waving for the check, and Franklin was already barking orders to the kitchen. Maria pasted her smile back on and went to work, but in her chest something was shifting. Something she couldn't name yet. A quiet certainty that whatever was behind that door was more dangerous than she dared to imagine. Maria tried to convince herself she was imagining things. She told herself that it was easier to see conspiracies in the ordinary when you were exhausted, when you were afraid every day might be the one where you lost everything. But no amount of rationalizing could quiet the gnawing suspicion in her gut, especially after what Sophia had said, and the look on Franklin's face when he caught her near the pantry. The next morning came with the same gray, unforgiving light. She held Sophia's hand a little tighter as they walked to the diner, each footstep echoing with questions she didn't dare say aloud. If Franklin was hiding something, what would he do if she pushed too hard? What would happen to them if she stayed silent? By the time she unlocked the back door and stepped into the kitchen, the early shift was already in full swing. The cook with the salt and pepper beard barely looked up as she came in. His eyes flicked to Sophia, and his mouth tightened. Maria didn't say a word to him. She just led her daughter to the break room, set out the coloring book again, and pressed a kiss to her temple. "You remember," she murmured. "Stay here," Sophia said dutifully, though her little mouth wobbled. Maria managed to smile. "That's my brave girl." The rush began before 6:30, wave after wave of regulars and tourists drifting in, filling the booths with noise and the clatter of cutlery. Maria lost herself in the rhythm. Seat, greet, pour coffee, scribble orders, deliver plates, 1,000 tiny actions that kept her hands moving, so her mind wouldn't. But even as she moved between tables, she was aware of that pantry door. The cook went in and out twice, carrying small crates Maria had never seen in the inventory deliveries. Once she caught the sharp, acrid smell of chemicals she couldn't name. Around mid-morning, she ducked into the break room to check on Sophia. The girl looked up from her coloring, her face pale. "Mommy," she whispered, voice tremulous. "I heard them again." Maria crouched beside her. "Who?" "The men with the boxes. They said a bad word. They said, if she talks, we'll shut her up." A cold shiver slipped down Maria's spine. She tried to keep her voice calm. "Who were they talking about?" Sophia's eyes darted to the door. "I don't know." Maria closed her eyes. For a moment, she let the fear swallow her. Then she exhaled and made her voice steady again. Stay here. I'll be right back. The cook was nowhere in sight when she stepped into the kitchen. She took 3 silent steps toward the pantry. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst right through her ribs. She pressed her ear to the door. Muffled voices drifted out. Low, tense. Late already. We can't hold it forever. Shipment comes tonight? If that woman sees anything. Maria clapped a hand over her mouth. She stepped back, her pulse thudding in her temples. Before she could move, the doorknob rattled. She leapt to the side just as the door opened. The cook stepped out, nearly colliding with her. What the hell are you doing? He snarled. I was looking for napkins, she stammered, hating how her voice shook. He squinted at her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he slammed the door shut behind him and stalked past without another word. Maria's knees nearly gave out. She forced herself to straighten. She couldn't do this alone anymore. She slipped back into the dining area, trying to look normal. But as she moved behind the counter, she felt eyes on her. The tall man in the gray jacket was back. Today he was sitting closer to the kitchen, his cup of coffee untouched in front of him. Maria took a steadying breath and walked over, her order pad clutched tight in her hand. Can I get you anything else? She asked, keeping her voice neutral. His eyes met hers, searching. You're Maria, aren't you? Her throat went dry. Why? My name is Harris. He slid a card across the table, Detective Harris. For a second, the whole world seemed to tilt sideways. She stared down at the card without picking it up. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said quietly. But I think you already know there's something going on in this diner that shouldn't be. Maria swallowed. What do you mean? I mean your boss is moving contraband through this place. Chemicals, falsified invoices, maybe worse. We've been watching it for months. Her breath caught. And you're telling me this why? Because you have a little girl in the back. His voice softened. I don't want her getting caught in the middle. Maria closed her eyes. I need this job, she whispered. I understand, he said, but I need your help. She opened her eyes. What do you want me to do? For now, nothing, Harris said. Just be careful. If you see anything new, shipments, deliveries, call me. He tapped the card. And Maria, if you feel like you or your daughter are in danger, you call me immediately. Don't wait. She nodded slowly. The card felt heavy as she slipped it into her apron. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. Every time she passed Franklin or the cook, her skin crawled with the memory of the words she'd overheard. If she talks, we'll shut her up. At 4, she stepped into the break room. Sophia was dozing on the couch, her small body curled up around the crayon she'd fallen asleep holding. Maria sank onto the floor beside her and let herself cry for the first time in months. Silent, shaking sobs she buried in her hands so Sophia wouldn't wake up afraid. When she finally wiped her eyes and looked around the dim little room, she knew there was no going back to pretending she didn't see the truth. That evening, after her shift, she walked Sophia home in the purple glow of twilight. The sidewalks were wet from an afternoon rain. Sophia clung to her hand, quiet, as if she could sense that something had changed. Mommy, she asked softly, are we okay? Maria forced a smile that felt brittle. Yes, baby, we're okay. But as they climbed the stairs to their apartment, she knew that was a lie. They weren't okay. Not yet. She tucked Sophia into bed and sat on the edge, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. You were very brave today, she whispered. Sophia yawned, eyes fluttering shut. I just stayed where you said. I know, Maria said. And that's what I need you to keep doing, no matter what happens. Sophia nodded sleepily, already drifting away. In the living room, Maria took out Harris's card and turned it over in her hand. The name and number seemed to pulse in the dim lamplight. Her thumb hovered over her phone. She could call. She could end this tonight. But the fear held her in place. What if they found out she was the one who talked? What if Franklin did something desperate before the police could stop him? She set the phone down and pressed both hands to her face. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow she would decide. But deep down, she knew the choice had already been made the moment Sophia opened that door. Maria woke the next morning before dawn, her heart already thudding like she was late, even though the sky was still black and the street outside silent. She lay there for a few minutes, staring at the cracked plaster on the ceiling, trying to gather the courage to move. Beside her on the low table, Detective Harris's card sat like a dare she hadn't found the guts to accept. The longer she looked at it, the sicker she felt. When she finally rose, she tiptoed to Sophia's side of the room. The little girl was curled tight under her thin blanket, her hand tucked under her cheek, breathing softly. Maria bent over and kissed her temple, breathing in the warm, familiar scent of her daughter's hair, and for a few heartbeats, she pretended the only thing she had to worry about was paying rent on time. By the time they stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city was waking up. Garbage trucks rumbled past, headlights flashing in the half-dark. A woman in scrubs waited at the corner bus stop with her head bowed over a paper cup of coffee. Maria wondered if she felt this same mix of dread and resignation before every shift. She held Sophia's hand all the way to the diner. Neither of them spoke. When they reached the back door, she paused, bracing herself. Inside, she knew the kitchen would already be alive with heat and tension, the same as any other day. And yet, it felt like every moment was 1 inch from collapsing into something she wouldn't be able to undo. The cook with the beard was already there, wiping his hands on a rag that looked too clean to be real. He didn't look at her when she came in. Franklin stood at the prep counter, talking to another man she hadn't seen before, a wiry guy with hollow cheeks and a red baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. As soon as he noticed Maria, he turned away like he didn't want her to see his face. She swallowed and looked down, hoping her expression didn't betray how fast her thoughts were racing. Franklin's voice was calm, but it carried across the kitchen like a warning. "Make sure everything's ready by 6. I don't want any mistakes tonight." Maria's stomach clenched. Tonight. Whatever was happening, it was coming to a head soon. She guided Sophia into the break room and crouched in front of her. "Listen to me, baby. Today is very important. You have to promise me you won't leave this room, no matter what." Sophia nodded solemnly. "I promise." Maria kissed her forehead. "That's my girl." When she stepped back into the kitchen, she could feel Franklin's eyes following her. She moved quickly, tying her apron and slipping through the swinging door to the dining room. It was easier out there, where everything was predictable. Coffee, orders, the clink of plates, and the low hum of customers talking about ordinary things. But her mind wouldn't quiet. Every time the kitchen door swung open, she thought she caught the smell again. That sharp chemical tang that didn't belong in a diner. She wiped tables with her hands shaking so badly she nearly knocked over a sugar jar. Around 8, the tall man in the gray jacket walked in and took the same booth by the kitchen. He didn't look at her right away. He set down his cup and watched the cooks through the swinging door like he was memorizing every movement. Maria walked over, heart hammering. "Detective," she said under her breath. Harris met her gaze, his expression calm but edged with urgency. "Have there been more shipments?" "Yes," she whispered. "They said something about tonight? A delivery." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Did you see what's in the crates?" "No," she admitted, "but I heard them say if I talked." His voice softened. "I know you're scared, but you've done the right thing." Maria's eyes blurred. She blinked quickly and looked away, afraid she'd start crying in front of the whole room. Harris set down his coffee, leaning forward. "Can you keep Sophia safe until tonight? We're planning to move in before anything leaves this building." Her throat felt too tight to answer. She nodded once. "If anything changes, anything at all, call me." He pressed a slip of paper into her palm. "This is my direct line." She closed her hand around it like a lifeline. The rest of the morning crawled past. Every customer felt like a distraction she didn't have time for. Every trip to the kitchen felt like stepping into a room with a live wire sparking in the dark. The cook wouldn't meet her eyes, but Franklin seemed to watch her more closely with each passing hour. At noon, she slipped into the break room to check on Sophia. The little girl looked up from her coloring book, her mouth trembling. "Mommy," she whispered, "I don't like it here. It smells funny." Maria hugged her tight. "I know, baby. Just a little longer." Sophia's arms tightened around her neck. "I heard them talking again." "What did they say?" "They said, midnight." Maria swallowed hard. "Are you sure?" Sophia nodded against her shoulder. Maria pulled back, brushing a tear from Sophia's cheek. "You are the bravest girl in the world." she whispered. When she returned to the dining room, Harris was gone. A fresh wave of panic crashed through her, but she forced herself to keep moving. If she fell apart now, she'd never make it through the day. By late afternoon, the diner had quieted. The cooks were cleaning their stations, and Franklin was in his office, the door closed. Maria wiped down the counter again and again, though it was already clean. When she finally gathered the courage to peek into the kitchen, the pantry door was open. She could see rows of unmarked boxes stacked nearly to the ceiling. Her heart lurched. She looked around quickly, no one watching, then slipped closer. The boxes were taped shut, but along one side she spotted a small triangle printed in black ink with numbers she didn't recognize. She reached out, pressing her fingers lightly to the seam of the tape. "What are you doing?" Franklin's voice exploded behind her. Maria jumped back like she'd been caught stealing. I was just... "Don't lie to me," he snapped, stepping closer. His eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. "You think I don't know you've been talking to someone?" Her pulse skittered wildly. "I don't know what you mean. You think I don't see that cop sniffing around here every day?" He gestured angrily toward the front of the diner. "You think I'm stupid?" "I haven't told him anything," she lied, even as her hand clenched around the slip of paper in her pocket. Franklin stared at her, breathing hard. "If you care about that little girl, you'll keep your mouth shut." Maria's stomach twisted. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you." His voice dropped to a low rasp. "Stay out of things you don't understand." She wanted to scream, to throw something, to run out the door and never look back. But she couldn't leave. Not without Sophia. So she forced herself to nod. "Fine," she whispered. "I understand." He held her gaze a moment longer, then turned away, slamming the pantry door behind him. The rest of the day passed in a daze. Maria moved like she was underwater, her thoughts blurred by terror and exhaustion. She could feel the decision tightening around her, like a noose. If she waited any longer, she'd lose whatever chance she had to protect her daughter. When the last customers left and the sun had slipped below the buildings, she gathered Sophia and held her close. "Mommy?" Sophia asked sleepily, her voice muffled against her shoulder. "Are we going home?" "Soon," Maria said, though she didn't know if it was true. She took out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the number Detective Harris had given her. She thought of Franklin's face, the crates, the smell of chemicals, and the cold certainty in his eyes when he warned her. She thought of Sophia, asleep in that break room with danger breathing down their necks. Then she pressed call. Maria didn't remember exactly what she said when Detective Harris picked up. Her voice came out in a cracked whisper, and she thought she heard her own heartbeat louder than his questions. All she knew was that by the time she hung up, she was trembling so hard she had to grip the edge of the counter to stay upright. Sophia clung to her skirt, sleepy but sensing the fear vibrating through her mother's bones. "Mommy?" she asked in a small voice. Maria knelt and pressed her forehead to her daughter's. "It's okay," she lied. "We just have to be brave a little longer." But she felt like a liar, even as she said it. She stayed at the diner through the dinner rush, trying to act normal, while her insides twisted tighter with every passing minute. The place seemed the same on the surface. Customers complaining about overcooked eggs, the clink of plates, the weary drone of the old radio. But to Maria, everything felt sharper, more brittle, like the world was waiting to shatter if she breathed wrong. At 9:30, Franklin called the kitchen staff together. Maria ducked behind a stack of crates to listen. "Midnight," Franklin was saying in that clipped voice he used when he was nervous. "We load everything out, no mistakes this time." One of the cooks shifted uneasily. "What if the cop comes back?" Franklin's jaw clenched. "Then we deal with it." Maria's hands went cold. She pressed a fist to her mouth to stop herself from making a sound. When they broke apart, she slipped back to the dining room on shaking legs. She had to get Sophia out. She had to do it now, before Franklin realized she wasn't as loyal as she pretended. But as she crossed the threshold, Franklin was suddenly there, blocking her path. "Leaving early?" His eyes were flat, watchful. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "Sophia's sick," she said. "I'm taking her home." His stare slid to the little girl, who was sitting on a stool near the register, her face pale and damp with sweat. For a moment, Maria thought he would refuse, but then he stepped aside. "Fine," he said slowly. "But be back in the morning. We're short-handed." "Of course," she said, her voice scraping her throat. She didn't wait for him to change his mind. She grabbed Sophia's backpack, lifted her into her arms, and walked straight out the door into the warm night air. The moment they were half a block away, she fished her phone out of her pocket and called Harris again. "We're out," she said, her voice shaking. "He's planning to move the crates at midnight." "Good," Harris said. "Go straight home. Keep your lights off and your door locked. Don't answer for anyone but me." "But I promise, Maria, we're ready." She swallowed, nodding, though he couldn't see her. "Okay." They reached their apartment just before 10. Maria locked the door behind them and double-checked the windows, her hands trembling so badly she dropped the curtain rod twice. Sophia was limp with exhaustion. Maria undressed her and wiped her forehead with a damp cloth, trying not to let her own panic show. "Mommy," Sophia whispered, as Maria pulled the blanket up to her chin. "Are we safe now?" Maria brushed her curls back and kissed her cheek. "Yes, baby," she said softly, hoping it would be true soon. After Sophia's breathing deepened into the slow rhythm of sleep, Maria sank onto the edge of the couch. Her limbs felt like water. She pressed her palms over her eyes, willing herself not to cry again. Every noise from the street below made her flinch. A car door slamming, a distant shout, everything felt like it was coming for them. She didn't know how long she sat there before her phone buzzed. Harris's number lit the screen. "Hello?" she whispered. "It's happening," he said. "We're moving in now." She closed her eyes. "Please be careful." "We will. Stay put." The line went dead. She set the phone on the table and wrapped her arms around herself. Minutes crawled past. She tried to keep her thoughts from spiraling by counting her own breaths, but she kept losing track. 20 minutes later, a distant wail of sirens rose over the rooftops. Maria pressed a hand to her mouth. She knew it was them. Harris and whoever he'd brought. She could almost see it, the diner she'd scrubbed every morning, the place that had paid for Sophia's shoes and her rent, crawling with police lights. The sirens faded and the silence after felt enormous. Her phone rang again. "Harris? It's over," he said, voice rough with exhaustion. "Franklin's in custody. They're processing everything now." Maria pressed her eyes shut. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Relief crashed over her so hard her knees nearly buckled. "You did good," Harris said softly. "You did exactly what you needed to." "Thank you," she whispered, though it felt too small for everything he'd done. "You and your daughter are safe now," he said. "I'll come by tomorrow to check on you." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Okay." When she hung up, the weight that had been crushing her chest finally eased. She walked to Sophia's side and sank down, stroking her cheek. The little girl stirred but didn't wake. Maria stayed there all night, her hand resting lightly on her daughter's back. When dawn crept across the cracked walls, she finally allowed herself to believe it was really over. But the next morning, the phone rang again. It was Alma. "Maria," she said, her voice thick, "they've shut the diner down. Everyone's out of a job." Maria closed her eyes. She had known this would happen, but the finality still hit like a stone to the ribs. "I'm so sorry," Alma said. "I didn't know. None of us did." "It's not your fault," Maria whispered. "If you need anything," Alma said, "anything at all." "I know," Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. After she hung up, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. Part of her wanted to feel regret, to wish she'd stayed quiet and kept her job. But when she looked at Sophia, still fast asleep and safe, she knew she would make the same choice again. They spent the day in their tiny apartment. Maria made toast and scrambled eggs, though neither of them had much appetite. Sophia watched cartoons with her head resting on Maria's lap. Outside, the city went on like nothing had changed. That afternoon, Harris came by. He didn't wear his jacket this time, just a plain shirt that made him look almost like any other tired man in the neighborhood. "May I come in?" he asked. Maria stepped aside. He looked around their little living room, then crouched to say hello to Sophia. "You're a very brave girl," he said softly. Sophia smiled shyly, hiding her face in Maria's side. Harris stood again, meeting Maria's gaze. "I know this has cost you," he said. Maria folded her arms across her chest. "It's worth it," he nodded. "There are funds available, victim support, relocation assistance if you want it." "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll think about it." He hesitated as if he wanted to say more, then handed her another card. "If you need anything, you call me." She nodded. When he left, Maria locked the door behind him and leaned her forehead against it. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to peace. That night, she tucked Sophia into bed and lay beside her until the girl's breathing slowed. She thought of the diner, the bright fluorescent lights, the cracked counters, the smell of burnt toast, and felt a pang she didn't expect. It had been a hard place, but it had been hers. Tomorrow, she would start over. She didn't know where or how, but she would. Because whatever happened next, she still had the most important thing. She had her daughter, safe and alive, and no one could ever take that from her. Maria had always believed that the worst part of surviving something terrible would be the moment it happened. The shouting, the panic, the breathless sprint through fear. But she learned quickly that the hardest part came afterward. The quiet days when no sirens wailed, when no one was shouting or slamming doors. The days when it was just you, your memories, and the dull ache of starting over. It had been a week since the raid. 7 days of waking in the dark, heart racing, because she thought she heard Franklin's voice outside the window. 7 mornings of trying to explain to Sophia why she didn't have to go back to the diner. She tried to keep her voice steady every time her daughter asked if Franklin would come looking for them. "He's gone," Maria promised over and over, though sometimes she wasn't sure she believed it. Harris had called twice to check on them, his voice low and reassuring, reminding her again that Franklin wouldn't be getting bail. She thanked him every time, though gratitude felt hollow compared to everything she'd lost. The diner hadn't just been a paycheck, it had been her second home, the one place she could count on. Even when the shifts were long and Franklin was impatient, she'd felt needed. Now, their apartment felt like a cage. On Monday morning, she dressed Sophia and herself as if it were any other workday, though there was nowhere to go. The motion of tying her apron around her waist brought a sting to her eyes, so she took it off again. She set a bowl of cereal in front of Sophia and sat across from her at the rickety table, picking at a piece of dry toast. "Mommy," Sophia said after a while, her spoon pausing in midair. "When are you going to work?" Maria swallowed. "I'm not sure yet, baby. Are we poor now?" The question made her throat close. She reached across the table, taking Sophia's small hand in hers. "No matter what, we'll be okay. But what if?" "Hey," Maria said softly, brushing a stray curl from Sophia's cheek. "You don't have to worry about that. That's my job." Sophia looked down at her cereal, nodding. After breakfast, Maria cleaned the kitchen. Though it was already spotless, she needed to be doing something. Anything to keep from thinking too much. She folded laundry and made a list of groceries she could barely afford. She checked the lock on the door 3 times. By early afternoon, she couldn't stand the walls any longer. She took Sophia by the hand and walked 3 blocks to the little park near the elementary school. The sky was overcast and the wind smelled of rain, but she welcomed the bite of it on her skin. Sophia ran ahead to the swings, her small body a bright splash of pink against the dull gray. Maria sank onto a bench and watched her, wondering what kind of childhood her daughter would remember. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice someone approaching until a shadow fell across her knees. She looked up, heart lurching, and found Alma standing there, clutching a canvas tote bag against her chest. "Maria," Alma said gently, "I've been trying to call you." "I turned my phone off." "I figured." Alma sat beside her, close enough their shoulders touched. "I wanted to see how you're holding up." Maria let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Some days are better than others." "That's the truth," Alma said with a sad smile. They sat in silence, watching Sophia pump her legs to swing higher. Maria thought of all the mornings Alma had shared an extra muffin with her, all the times she'd stepped in when Maria needed a break. "I miss it," Maria whispered finally. "Even with everything, I miss it." "I do too," Alma admitted. "You know, when you work somewhere long enough, it starts to feel like it belongs to you. Like you belong to it." Maria nodded, blinking back tears. "I heard there's a new place opening on 10th Street, Alma said after a moment. "A cafe. They're hiring." Maria hesitated. The idea of starting over in a kitchen with new faces, new rules, it made her stomach twist. But she also knew she didn't have a choice. "Maybe I'll go see," she said quietly. "You should." Alma squeezed her hand. You're too good at what you do to stay home. They sat for a little while longer until the clouds finally let go of their rain. Sophia squealed and ran toward them, arms flung wide. Time to go, Maria said, rising and gathering her daughter close. I'm glad you're safe, Alma said before they parted. Me too, Maria whispered. That night, after Sophia was asleep, Maria dug out the slip of paper Harris had given her. She didn't need to call, but touching the crisp edge of it reminded her she hadn't imagined the fear. The way the walls had felt like they were closing in. She'd survived. In the morning, she dressed in her cleanest jeans and the pale blue blouse she saved for special occasions. She brushed Sophia's hair and tied it back with a pink ribbon. Where are we going? Sophia asked as Maria packed up her purse. To look for something new, Maria said. The cafe on 10th Street was smaller than the diner had been. It smelled of fresh paint and polished wood, and the sign in the window read, "Help Wanted," in cheerful red letters. Maria hesitated on the threshold. She could almost hear Franklin's voice in her head, telling her she wasn't cut out for anything else. But she pushed the thought away and stepped inside. A woman behind the counter looked up and smiled. She was maybe 40, with soft eyes and laugh lines around her mouth. Can I help you? I heard you're hiring, Maria said. You heard right. The woman stepped around the counter, offering her hand. I'm Denise. I'm the owner. Maria. She shook Denise's hand, trying to hide the tremor in her fingers. Denise glanced at Sophia, who was peeking shyly from behind Maria's hip. And who's this? This is my daughter, Sophia. Denise's smile warmed. It's nice to meet you, Sophia. Sophia ducked her head but smiled back. You have experience? Denise asked, turning back to Maria. Yes, Maria said, her voice steadier now. I worked at Maple Street Diner for 3 years. I remember that place. Denise's smile faded a little. Shame what happened. Maria swallowed. Yes. Well, I believe everyone deserves a second chance, Denise said. We're opening next week. If you're interested, I can give you a trial shift. Maria felt something she hadn't dared to hope for, a small spark of relief. I'd love that, she said. Perfect. Denise handed her a small packet of forms. Fill these out and bring them back tomorrow. As Maria thanked her and turned to leave, she felt Denise's hand touch her arm. You're doing a good job, Denise said softly. Being here. Trying again. Maria's throat thickened. Thank you, she whispered. Sophia skipped beside her as they walked home, her small hand warm in Maria's. Did you get the job? She asked. Almost, Maria said with a smile. I have to go back tomorrow. That's good, Sophia said, swinging their hands. Maria looked up at the pale sky. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself believe that maybe they were going to be okay. When they reached their apartment, she set the forms on the table and sat down, taking a deep breath. The fear hadn't disappeared. She suspected it never would. But it no longer owned her. Tomorrow she'd fill out the papers, and the day after that she'd stand behind a counter again. She'd learn new routines, memorize new faces. She'd build something better out of everything she'd lost. And through it all, she'd hold Sophia's hand and remind her, and herself, that they were stronger than anyone had ever believed. Maria spent the evening filling out the application forms with a careful hand, pausing often to check Sophia's homework or warm up soup on the stove. Every line she wrote felt like planting a stake in a new future she was still afraid to trust. She could feel the weight of the past weeks in her shoulders. A heaviness she carried, whether she was washing dishes or brushing Sophia's hair. But it wasn't the same suffocating fear as before. This was something quieter, more tired, like the ache left after a wound began to close. After Sophia was tucked in bed, Maria sat at the kitchen table, the forms stacked neatly in front of her. The lamp's yellow light spilled across the paperwork, catching on the black ink of her name. For a moment, she rested her fingertips against the page. Denise had looked her in the eye and said she deserved a second chance. Maria wanted to believe it. She wanted it so badly she was afraid to breathe too hard in case she knocked the possibility away. Sleep was slow to come. When it finally did, she dreamed of the diner, Franklin's voice rising, the pantry door gaping open, crates stacked to the ceiling. She woke with her heart pounding, the sheet tangled around her legs. The sky outside was still pale with dawn. She slipped from bed and stood for a moment in the kitchen doorway, watching Sophia sleep. It soothed her, the sight of her daughter's small body curled safe under the blanket. At 7, she dressed Sophia in her favorite purple shirt and braided her hair in 2 neat plaits. They ate toast and jam in the quiet, neither of them saying much. Maria felt the way she used to on the first day of school, hopeful and queasy all at once. "Ready?" she asked when Sophia finally pushed her plate away. Sophia nodded solemnly. They left the apartment and walked the few blocks to the cafe. The morning air was damp and smelled faintly of rain, but Maria liked the clean coolness of it against her cheeks. It felt like a sign, something fresh starting. Inside, Denise greeted them with the same warm smile. She handed Maria an apron the color of fresh cream. "You'll be on the counter this morning," she said. "Mostly coffee and pastries until lunch. We'll take it slow." Maria tied the apron around her waist, hands trembling. She could feel the eyes of the other staff on her, curious, maybe a little wary. She knew the diner's closing had made the news. People whispered about the smuggling and the arrests. She tried not to think about what they might have heard about her. Denise introduced her to a young man named Isaac, who showed her where everything was: the coffee filters, the rows of mugs, the handwritten labels on the pastry case. It was different from the diner, quieter and brighter. A bell chimed softly over the door each time a customer entered. No shouting from the kitchen, no greasy smoke. Maria breathed it in. She could get used to this. By mid-morning, she'd fallen into a rhythm, taking orders, wiping the counter, learning the prices without needing to glance at the register. Each time she handed over a receipt, her confidence grew. She was good at this. She'd always been good at this. At noon, Sophia was sitting at a corner table with a coloring book Denise had found in the back. The little girl looked up and waved whenever Maria passed by, her grin wide and proud. Maria waved back every time, feeling something ease in her chest each time she saw that smile. It was almost easy to pretend the past month hadn't happened, that she was just another mother working to make ends meet. But at 2 o'clock, the bell over the door jingled again, and Maria looked up from the register to see Detective Harris stepping inside. For a second, she forgot to breathe. He scanned the cafe until his gaze landed on her, then lifted a hand in a polite wave. He didn't look like a cop today, just a tired man in a worn jacket and dark slacks. "Can I help you?" Maria asked, forcing her voice into something neutral as he approached the counter. "I hope so," Harris said. "I'm off duty, just wanted to see how you were settling in." Maria swallowed. Part of her felt relief, but another part, the part that still flinched at sudden sounds, wondered if something else had happened. It's good here," she said. "Mind if I get a coffee?" "Of course." She turned to the machine, grateful for something to do with her hands. When she handed over the cup, their fingers brushed. Harris's voice lowered. "You look better," he said. "More rested." Maria hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." He took his coffee and moved to the corner table, where Sophia sat coloring. She looked up, blinking, as Harris crouched beside her chair. "You must be Sophia," he said gently. Sophia peeked up at Maria for permission. When Maria nodded, she turned back to Harris and gave a shy nod. "I heard you were very brave," he said. Sophia's mouth wobbled into a small smile. "I just did what Mommy said." "That's the bravest thing of all," Harris said, his voice soft. Maria turned away quickly, pretending to straighten a stack of napkins. She couldn't bear for him to see how close she was to crying. When she looked back, Harris was standing again. "I won't keep you," he said. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you both." Maria pressed her lips together, then managed, "Thank you for everything." He nodded, then turned and left without another word. The bell chimed behind him, and the cafe felt brighter somehow. Maria let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Denise stepped beside her. "Friend of yours?" Maria swallowed. "Something like that." Denise studied her for a moment, then smiled. "He seems like good people." "He is," Maria said softly. When her shift ended at 4, she untied her apron and gathered Sophia's things. Denise walked them to the door. "You did great today," she said. Maria felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "Thank you for giving me a chance." "You don't have to thank me," Denise said. "You earned it." Outside, the sky had cleared to a washed-out blue. Maria held Sophia's hand as they walked home, feeling something she hadn't dared to feel for weeks: hope. When they reached their apartment, Sophia ran ahead up the steps, calling over her shoulder. "Can we have spaghetti tonight?" Maria smiled. Sure, baby. They spent the evening cooking together. Sophia stood on a chair to stir the pot while Maria chopped vegetables. It wasn't fancy, just pasta and jarred sauce, but it felt like a feast. At the table, Sophia twirled noodles around her fork. Mommy? Yes? Are we happy now? Maria set down her glass of water, her chest tightening. She thought about the past weeks, the fear, the way she'd nearly lost everything. She looked at her daughter's wide, hopeful eyes. Yes, she said softly, I think we are. Later, after the dishes were washed and Sophia was in bed, Maria stepped onto the small balcony. The city hummed below, alive with lights and movement. She rested her arms on the railing and closed her eyes. The ache in her chest was still there, but it was softer now, threaded through with something steadier. Resilience. Inside, her phone buzzed on the table. A message from Denise. Just confirming you're on for tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Maria smiled as she typed back, Yes, I'll be there. She turned off the light and slipped into bed beside Sophia, pulling the blanket over them both. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she knew. The past didn't disappear just because you'd survived it. But as she drifted towards sleep, Maria felt the smallest, most astonishing certainty take root inside her. They were going to be okay. No matter what came next. The days that followed blurred into a gentle, unfamiliar rhythm. Maria rose each morning before the sun crested the rooftops, slipping from bed to brew coffee while Sophia still slept, her small form curled like a question mark under the blankets. For the first time in what felt like years, Maria's heartbeat wasn't always racing. She still woke sometimes in the dark. Her breath caught in her throat as she waited for a pounding fist on the door or the creak of footsteps outside the window. But the dread had become softer, a memory rather than a certainty. The cafe on 10th Street opened officially the following Monday. Denise brought in balloons and hung a new chalkboard sign out front, welcoming neighbors and promising the best muffins in the city. Maria stood behind the counter that morning, in her cream apron, watching the early customers trickle in. An elderly man with a cane, a woman with a baby strapped to her chest, a delivery driver who grinned as he read the specials. Every smile, every polite word felt like another stitch pulling her life back together. She learned quickly that this cafe wasn't like the diner. There was no rush of shouting cooks or the slam of metal doors. Here, people spoke softly. Music drifted from a speaker near the window, and the air smelled of cinnamon and coffee beans instead of fried eggs and stress. Maria found that she liked the hush, the ease, the way Denise thanked her every night as if she were doing something extraordinary instead of simply showing up. Sophia settled in too. She came to the cafe each afternoon after kindergarten, sitting at the little table by the pastry case with her coloring books and her small, serious face. The regulars took to her quickly. Mr. Lopez, the elderly man with the cane, brought her a wrapped chocolate on Fridays. The delivery driver, Curtis, always asked what masterpiece she was working on. Sophia beamed under the attention, her shoulders uncoiling more each day. Sometimes Maria caught Denise watching them with that soft, considering expression. She never pried, never asked about the diner or Franklin or the headlines that had once kept Maria awake. She just kept giving Maria more hours, more trust, more small kindnesses that Maria didn't know how to repay. On a Wednesday afternoon near closing, Harris appeared again. This time he wore no badge and carried no questions. Only a small white box tied with twine. For you, he said when Maria met him at the counter, her brows lifting. She accepted the box cautiously. What is it? Just some pastries, from my sister's bakery. He shifted on his feet, almost embarrassed. I thought maybe you two could use something sweet. Maria smiled despite herself. Thank you. That's very thoughtful. He inclined his head. How's Sophia? She's good. Better every day. That's what matters. They stood there a moment in the hush of the late afternoon. Maria realized she didn't feel the same jittery anxiety she used to when she saw him, only a quiet gratitude that he'd kept his promise. Will you sit for a cup of coffee? She asked impulsively. He looked surprised but nodded. Sure. Denise caught Maria's eye as she poured the coffee and set it in front of Harris. There was no teasing in her gaze, only understanding. Maria was grateful for that. Sophia slipped off her chair and tiptoed over to them, her coloring book pressed to her chest. "Hi," she said shyly, peering up at Harris. "Hi there," he said, smiling. "What are you working on today?" "A picture of our new house," she announced, opening the book to show him a careful drawing of their apartment building, with stick figures waving from the window. Harris studied it with the gravity of someone inspecting an architectural plan. "That's pretty wonderful," he said. "You're quite the artist." Sophia grinned, her shoulders straightening under the praise. When they finally left the cafe that evening, Sophia skipped ahead, swinging her small backpack. Maria walked more slowly, feeling the last edges of winter in the air. She had thought she would never feel light again, but here she was, watching her daughter laugh in the dusky pink glow of the setting sun. At home, she set the white pastry box on the table and opened it. Inside were 4 perfect croissants, each one golden and flaky. Maria hesitated, then broke off a piece and held it out to Sophia. "To new beginnings," she said softly. Sophia beamed and clinked her little croissant piece against Maria's. "To new beginnings." They ate together at the table, crumbs everywhere, their giggles echoing in the small kitchen. That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Maria stepped onto the balcony. The city glittered below, and for the first time it looked like possibility instead of threat. She pressed her palms to the railing and drew in a slow, careful breath. She thought about all the nights she'd lain awake, imagining every terrible thing that could happen if she spoke out. She thought of the pantry door at the diner, of Franklin's flat stare, of the voice that had hissed she would lose everything. And then she thought of Harris's calm promise, of Denise's hand on her arm when she'd first walked into the cafe, of Sophia's quiet voice asking if they were safe yet. They were. It hadn't been easy. It would never be perfect. But Maria finally understood that starting over didn't mean erasing what you survived. It meant carrying it with you and refusing to let it define you. When she came back inside, she switched off the lamp and slipped into bed beside her daughter. Sophia shifted in her sleep, curling instinctively toward Maria's warmth. Maria lay awake a while, watching the shadows move across the ceiling. She knew there would still be hard days. Money would be tight. Trust would come slowly. But for the first time in years, she felt like she had enough strength to face whatever came next. In the morning, she woke before dawn and stood at the window, cradling a mug of coffee in both hands. The street outside was quiet, the sky slowly lightening from gray to pale blue. Sophia's soft footsteps padded across the floor behind her. She turned, and her daughter blinked up at her sleepily. "Mommy?" "Yes, baby." "Can we stay here forever?" Maria knelt and cupped Sophia's small face in her hands. "We can stay as long as we want," she said. "This is our home now." Sophia smiled, and for that one perfect moment, Maria believed it completely. After breakfast, they walked to the cafe together. The sidewalks were still damp from an early rain, and the air smelled fresh. Denise was unlocking the door when they arrived. "Morning," she called, waving. "Morning," Maria replied. Sophia darted inside ahead of them, already chattering about the drawing she planned to finish. Denise glanced at Maria. "You look different today." Maria brushed a stray hair from her cheek. "Better?" "Stronger," Denise said simply. Maria felt something settle in her chest, a quiet, certain peace. She stepped behind the counter and tied on her apron. The bell over the door jingled as the first customer came in, and Maria smiled, ready to greet them, because this was her life now. A life she had fought for, piece by piece. A life she had chosen, not just endured. And as she looked out at the little cafe, at her daughter waving from the corner table, she knew she would never again let fear steal what she had reclaimed. This story teaches us that true courage isn't always loud or dramatic. It often looks like a mother quietly standing her ground when everything feels impossible. Maria's journey reminds us that doing the right thing can cost you almost everything you have. But the price of silence is always higher. Even in her darkest moments, when she was threatened, humiliated, and afraid, Maria chose to protect her daughter and speak out against injustice. That choice didn't erase her struggles, but it set her free from living in fear. We learn that resilience is built day by day, in the small decisions to keep going when you're exhausted and scared. It's in accepting help when you need it, in trusting that no matter how broken your life seems, you can build something new from the ruins. The story also shows how kindness and community, like Denise's compassion and Detective Harris's steady support, can make all the difference to someone fighting battles you can't see. Ultimately, Maria's story proves that hope is never lost, and healing can grow in the most unlikely places. Even when life doesn't return to what it was, it can still become something strong, safe, and beautiful. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another inspiring story.